Good morning, everyone. We're going to make a start. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for taking time out of your busy day. And we're going to spend the next sort of 15-20 minutes understanding GDPR. So first of all, just to introduce myself, I am Simon G. I'm the business development manager here at ACUTEC. I'm also joined by Amy Stanishevsky.
Yeah, you said it right.
Thank
Well
you.
done.
Digital marketing specialist. Essentially, Amy has put this event on, so I think we should say a big thank you to her. But also, Amy has had quite a lot of exposure to GDPR as part of her role, so it's all fitting for Amy to be very involved here. I think one of the couple of things before we really get started here, one of the purposes today is to give you a little bit of an overview of how GDPR can. The one thing that I will say is we're not here to offer legal advice today. We are not legal people.
Can I just say, Simon, I'm ever so sorry, we might have just got muted there slightly. So Lee, who is controlling it, might need to be a little bit careful about that. But if you just want to carry on and just maybe repeat what you've just said.
Yeah, so we want to give you a bit of an exposure to GDPR here. We're not here to offer legal advice. We're not legal people, so I think that's very important. Also, a lot of the information on GDPR is not yet concrete legislation, and that is a really important thing to state here. It is still, as we talk, in the review, but it is happening, and there are certain things that we do know are going to be on that radar rather than some of the specifics. Okay, so obviously we're IT, security is our kind of specialism, so there will be a strong angle from that point of view. So let's start by just talking about some of the cyber security problem, and I guess why GDPR has come about is this is the starting point of it. Now there's some really interesting statistics here. So 1 in 5 UK businesses were hit by a cyber attack last year. That is quite a high, scary figure.
Very scary.
And they're proven cases. That's the other thing to point out as well. We're not particularly going to talk about cybercrime specifically today. Some of you may have joined some of our other webinars about that, or we can discuss that offline today if you wish to. 42% of businesses with over 100 employees have been the victim of some cyber attack. Again, a very high percentage, but perhaps more pertinently, there'll be some of you on this webinar here today which do exceed the 100 plus employees. There'll be a lot of you that maybe don't exceed that. Don't think that this doesn't affect you, I think is a very important message. It's just harder to get that reported. It doesn't have the same media effect in that. So there's no real statistics on people that have got less than 100 employees.
I think the thing is as well, if you're under 100 employees and it happens to you and you sort it out, you don't think, oh, I'm going to phone the police or anything. You know, we're only a small company, and I think it's really important to say that a lot of these statistics that we are seeing, yes, they're very scary, but at the same time, we're not seeing the whole picture here at all.
No. And now 1 in 4 businesses, or should I say only 1 in 4 businesses, have put appropriate security measures in place. Now again, I don't want to get too specific today, but things to assess is, have you got an appropriate firewall for your business? Have you got an appropriate AV? Are your servers being appropriately patched from a security perspective? This is the kind of thing that we're talking about from an IT perspective of having security in place. Okay, let's kind of focus a little bit more on GDPR. As we can see, if we didn't know what it stood for, it's General Data Protection Regulation. What we can very clearly see from that slide is when it will commence, and that's from the 25th of May 2018, which initially to me seems a long way away. However, I do forget that we're now in the third quarter.
Less than a year now.
In the third quarter of 2017, yeah, it's less than a year. So, and what it is doing is it's replacing the Data Protection Act. So, well, I'll let you kind of expand on that, Amy.
The Data Protection Act was put into place back in 1995, so that doesn't seem that far away, but when you think about it, our business began in 1995. We're celebrating our 21st birthday this year, so it is a long period of time ago, and over that time so much has changed. The cloud has been introduced, social media has skyrocketed, And the way that we interact with technology and how our data is used has changed dramatically. And because of this, that is why this has had to be put into place.
Yeah, without, we were having a discussion this morning about mobile phones and what we were using 20 years ago compared to what we're using today. It's significantly different what we do. There used to be a mobile phone to make a phone and maybe then do a text. That was it. Some dodgy games on there. Now we can essentially do everything that we can do on a PC pretty much on a mobile device. So technology has changed. Those old data protection directives are no longer appropriate the way that technology, unfortunately, criminal activity goes with technology.
Yeah.
Okay, a nice diagram here. If we look on the right-hand side, so these are the key changes from the Data Protection Directive to the GDPR. I'm going to use acronyms now. So we've got the small circle on the right-hand side, which is the Data Protection Directive. The big circle on the left-hand side, I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to say that's probably the difference between the fine that we'll get if we break these rules. There's a little bit more involved than that, though. One of the areas there, you've got increased territorial scope. Do you want to expand on that, Amy?
I think what's important with this is it's not just the EU that it affects. I know a lot of the people on here will be in the UK, but what you need to be aware of is that it's not just EU countries that have to comply. It's based around EU citizens, not EU businesses. So basically, I'm looking at buying a phone case at the moment from a company in America, quite a small company, but they do a specific thing. If they were to take my details, because I'm an EU citizen, with GDPR, they would still need to process that in a certain way. So it's not just a couple of countries putting some laws into place. This is a global thing that will happen.
Okay. I think introduction of penalties, I'm going to talk a little bit about that later on.
Yeah.
All I'm going to say at this stage is there are significant penalties that are going to be put in place. And like I say, I'm going to come to some examples. The other area that you've got there is strengthening conditions for consent of data use. Let's look at some of those specifics here. So, again, I don't want to read slides today because that's not the purpose of it, but we can see the first three. As all these governing legislations, there's often an overlap, and they do like to be wordy and detailed and sometimes complicated rather than saying what the simple facts are. But there we say personal data must be processed lawfully, fairly and transparently. Personal data can only be collected for specific, explicit and legitimate purposes, and personal data must be adequate, relevant and limited to what is necessary for processing. Those three, there's a very large overlap, isn't there?
There's an overlap within a lot of it, to be fair. If you were to, I've sat and read through all of the ICO stuff on it, and a lot of it becomes very overlapped. I want to say again here, we are not legal experts, but this is just a general overview for you to get you started on your GDPR journey, as it were. With those first three, it's all about being fair to a certain extent and transparent. You're not using this data just because you want to. It's because there is an actual reason there for you to do it. So if we were to use a real life example with that, a couple of weeks ago, I went to a clothing shop in Birmingham and I bought something, and I was asked if I would like to be emailed my receipt instead of it being printed off, which is very useful because it's easy to file. And I said yes, but then the person said to me, would you like to be added to our mailing list? At this point, I turned around and said no, because I'm already on the mailing list. But if I hadn't have been on the mailing list and they'd have sent me the email with my receipt, fine. But if they'd then gone on to send me a marketing email asking me to buy something else, then this would have been a misuse of data under the GDPR, because you are essentially saying, do you want this? And I've said no, but then you've still continued to do that. So it's all about being transparent and fair in how you actually do things.
Does that mean I'm not going to get lots of emails from people that signed up 15 years ago, still trying to sell me stuff?
Well, it depends who they are and what their laws are around that, but possibly yes.
I think in terms of, we could talk a little bit specifically about each of those, but I'm also cautious that the detail in there, there's a bit of concrete evidence. I think there's so much an overlap. You will also get these slides sent to you. So I think let's look at some other areas, and one thing that we want to quickly disperse is some of the myths around GDPR. So this is one that we've heard quite a lot. The UK will not enforce GDPR following Brexit? Well, first of all, I can categorically say that is not the case.
No.
So we talk about not being legal. We're not legal advisors today. And the fact that there's some concrete factors to still get in place. One of them is that we will be part of this law. I mean, Amy's actually already mentioned that if we're buying something from the US,
exactly,
because we are part of this UK entity, they still have to follow those rules and regulations. So, you know, again, I'm not going to read that slide. The key factor is we are part of it, and that will be.
I think a lot of it is, you know, oh, we're leaving the EU, so it's not going to affect us. But we're heavily involved with things being written, and we were very, very much involved with this legislation being made. So for us not to be part of it just doesn't make any sense. And the government have said anyway now that we will have GDPR. There is no question about it now.
One of my favourites is the next one is, I'm a small business, therefore GDPR does not apply to me. Again, the scale of detail, fines, etc. Yes, they will be different depending on the size of the business. But if you are holding people's data, you will need to be responsible for it. I think if we could, as simply as that, really.
I mean, we were talking earlier, you know, I think Uber, I don't know how big they are in terms of their actual employees. Now, obviously, they've got all the taxi drivers all over the world. But in terms of their actual business when they first started out, I think they were quite small. But if you look at the brand and how everyone who knew who they were, just because you've only got 25 staff compared to a company that's got 250 staff, 2,000 staff, you're still holding that data. There's no difference in your operation. You might have less data, but you're still holding that person's data. Whether Uber has Simon's data or whether, you know, that small phone case company has Simon's data, they've still got it. They've still got to both comply with the law. So.
Okay. Another myth, there will be no financial penalties for breaching GDPR legislation.
It's a big one.
Yeah, I mean, this is almost people saying, oh, I'll believe it when I see it kind of attitude. I would probably go the other way in many cases. Where they will start and where they will finish, I think certainly in the early days, they will make some significant examples of companies. I'm all going to talk from my opinion for a second here, which they'll probably attack the very big companies. First, like I say, we don't know exactly what is going to happen, but for a guarantee, there will be a financial fine penalty, if you like, to these. So, as you can see there, I think it's important to say this statistic that organisations that are deemed non-compliant can be fined up to 4% of annual turnover. And the important thing is it's turnover there, not profit.
Yeah.
Or 20 million euros, whichever is the greater.
And I think the thing is there, as much as it's up to, and that's based on severity, you know, and I think the thing is with it as well, people see 4% and they think, oh, you know, it's 4%. But actually think about what's 4% of your turnover.
That might be your profit gone.
Yeah. You know, all those plans that you might be thinking of putting into place next year, they could just be gone like that because of this. And I think if we move on then to
well, then there's my data is encrypted.
Yeah.
So I don't need to worry about fines.
And I think this is important as well, because I think a lot of people, I mean, we are going to touch on security, obviously, because, you know, that's what we do. But in terms of encrypting your data, oh, well, I'm not going to have the data's not going to be breached, so I'm not going to be fined. You will still get fined if you're not processing the data correctly. And I think that's a really important thing with GDPR. There's a lot of IT companies out there, I'm not saying that we're one of them, who are scaremongering essentially with the security aspect of it. And it's not just about that, it's about how you're processing it. It's not just about whether you lose it or not. It's all about what you're doing with it.
Okay. Talking fines, you might be able to guess the company, but I thought it appropriate not to actually detail in front of your eyes who it was. But there was a company that in 2015 breached essentially the data protection, wasn't it, in this case? And they were fined £400,000. What specifically happened in that case, Anna?
Basically, if you asked our MD about it, Chris, he would say that schoolboys could have done it, because they, in this case, what had happened was there was a data breach of customer data, and what had happened was that their software was really out of date. Don't quote me on this, but I think it was on XP, and because of it, it hadn't been patched for all the latest security updates, so it was completely easy to just get into their systems. So they were fined £400,000 for that. Under GDPR, they would have been fined 70 million.
Potentially 70 million.
Yeah.
Based on that 4%.
Yeah.
That would be a maximum fine of 4%, 70 million. What I will say is whether they would have got fined that or not,
yeah,
it would be significantly more than 400,000 if it was to happen. Whether it would go to the extreme 70 million, we don't know. Okay. I think something you've already kind of mentioned there is it's not just your security.
No. I think with that company, as it says on the slides, with that company, they reported that, so it happened in October 2015. I know that because I've just started here. And 3 months later, at the beginning of 2016, that company reported losing 100,000 customers. That's only within that 3-month period. So God knows what the statistic is now, but yeah, and it's that PR disaster.
I was going to say that the reputation, the PR disaster is so key. It's so easy now because of social media, etc., to get a negative press. You know?
Absolutely.
I mean, you buy something and you're happy with it. How many people really provide feedback? If you're disappointed with something, you know, you're straight on and putting a review. So it's so easy to give negative feedback. If we scale that up now to something like this, and you are on tabloids, you know, news, okay, depending on the size of your business is whether that will happen. But negative press, so that, you know, it's the PR disaster. So that's really what we kind of just want to throw.
I think the thing is for businesses, especially small businesses as well, because that's a lot of the people that are on this webinar, you work so hard to build that reputation for your company. You spend years doing it, and then just like that, it goes. I mean, you've just said about the social media. You know, I like to complain, and I go on Twitter and I'll complain to a company because that's the best way I find to get a response. And that's public because it's in the public eye, so I know they have to respond. I never go on Twitter and say, oh, that was brilliant. I know.
And then going back to that previous slide where we talked about that company that got a fine, the fine probably didn't really affect them, if I'm absolutely honest. And I know this is a high-end business. However, they lost 100,000 customers in the first 3 months.
Yeah.
Would they get them customers back? I'm not going to say yes or no there. I can guarantee they get all of them back, even if they got some of them back. We know how hard it is to get customers back once they're gone.
So I think this next slide is just a general, what you kind of need to know. So as we mentioned before, you know, even the USA, they need to be compliant with the EU data. That's just one of those things now with GDPR. You also need to know that, because I know a lot of people keep saying, well, the police are screwed then, because what are they going to do because they can't handle this data? For national security purposes, GDPR does not apply. You're responsible for making sure that the data is up to date. And there's also, it creates new rights for you as an individual. You are a data subject, and because you are a data subject, the GDPR basically brings you a number of rights. So one of them is the data portability. So if you are with a service provider and you want to move service provider, and that service provider is not playing ball because they don't want to give your data to a competitor, they can't do that anymore. You have the right to move your data to where you want it to go, and you have the right for it to be erased or for you to object. It's all about what you want to happen with your data. And then if we move on now into security. So this is the big thing, isn't it, Simon? This is you know, as much as it's all about processing your data, you need to make sure that you are putting the right things in place to protect your business, because otherwise you are liable for these fines.
Yeah, I think one of the key aspects of this is that 72-hour message as well. You know, if you have been breached, whether that's that, you know, you've been hacked or whatever, then that needs to be reported. It's been upfront and honest. It's not possible by putting these measures in place that you are, for example, not going to get hacked. But if you do, then you need to report it to the ICO
Yeah.
within that period of time,
Yeah.
72 hours. I know that the initial thing was, get back up and running, etc.
Yeah.
But also that informing them, because the non-informing is where you're breaching it, essentially.
And I think the thing is as well that's important is it's your data subjects as well. So if you've got a client and you've lost their data, and it will have a detrimental effect on them. So say you've lost their financial information, you need to tell them within 72 hours as well, because they need to put measures in place to protect themselves. If say, I don't know, Apple lost my credit card details, then they need to let me know, because I need to cancel my credit card basically. And if they don't tell me within 72 hours, then a lot can happen in that time. And I think the important thing to say as well, you will get a fine for this as well. I believe it's half of what the other fine is, so I think it's up to 2% of your turnover, and 10 million euros if you don't inform who you need to about the breach.
Okay. And I think the next statement is kind of one that we like, is perfect security is impossible. We can no longer sit and say this won't happen or this won't happen for definite. But failing to try is unacceptable.
Yeah.
So a lot of the things that we've talked about today is to say, well, make sure you've got the appropriate security measures in, make sure you know what the rules and regs are of GDPR as it's going forward. If something does happen, make sure that is reported, because that way you are trying to prevent this from happening, and therefore that is acceptable.
Yeah.
And not putting those measures in is not.
I think it's something we do a lot of cybersecurity webinars as well, and I think one of the things we always say is, you're not going to have a fail-safe thing, because viruses are made every day, and there's something called 0 day. So if you need to be able to protect yourself, you're not going to be able to protect yourself as soon as that virus is created, because the measure has not been put in place. But failing to try under GDPR is unacceptable now. You can't think, oh, I've got all this data, but I'm not going to do anything to protect it, because you have a responsibility as a controller of that data to look after it, because otherwise you are in breach.
Yeah. Okay. And I think pretty much just to finish off here, I know we started it very much with cybersecurity, because that is an area that obviously we spend a lot of time discussing with our clients, and making sure that the appropriate things are in place. So again, it's not necessarily, well, the first question is, have you got a firewall in? But is it an appropriate firewall? Have you got antivirus? Is every device covered by antivirus? Is it, don't go for a free subscription in a business. It's not appropriate to have that in there. Have you got anti-spam? And is it configured correctly? Are your servers and devices being patch managed? I think a really strong patch managed security patches.
I think the thing with patch management as well, I think it's always something like, oh yeah, I need to update everything. But that's what's causing the problems. If you look at what happened to the NHS with WannaCry, if you look at what happened to that company we won't name, that was all because they were using old operating systems, old software that did not have the security updates that they needed. And it's like, yeah, okay, you've got to pay so much for that to be upgraded, but do you want this fine? Is that a little bit of payment worth the PR disaster and the fine at the end of the day?
That's it. And the other things like backup and DR. If you do, this is again slightly out of the context of GDPR, but if you do get hacked, for example, and you have got issues with data, have you got an appropriate backup? Can you recover that? A, can you recover it? And B, can you recover it in the time objectives that your business needs to as well? Something that we're very keen on, this next good point, is an IT policy. I've seen IT policies in many businesses, and I certainly wouldn't read them. It should be simple and understandable by every single employee. And if they don't understand it, then it either needs to be explained to them, or the policy needs to be read.
I think it's important to have the reasons why as well. It's all well and good to turn around and say, don't do that. But if you explain the reasoning why, they're probably more likely to not do it if they understand the consequences of what happens if they do.
And that comes into the next thing, about end user education as well. So, making sure they're aware of the sorts of things that they can come in on email traffic. What happens if they don't, do certain things on their devices, etc. So it's that end user education piece. You know, we're not going to get into every little specific element today, but these for us are what we call the 7 steps to cyber security.
Yeah, and I think it is important to state that this is a massive topic. And when I wrote these slides, it was very difficult to try and tell you everything that I felt that you needed to know. There is a lot more to this, and we've just kind of grazed across it, and we aren't legal experts, but we've tried to give you a good summary of what you need to know.
Okay. And I think, you know, I know your time is precious, so I think at that stage, I'd like just to say a thank you from myself and Amy. There is a good resource that we've got a link to there.
Yeah.
This slide will be going out to you anyway.
Yeah, and I'll send a recording to everyone as well.
We are going to stay online for a few minutes.
Yeah.
So if you have got any questions, how can they put the questions
If
on
you
there?
have any questions for us at all, you can. If you're on Skype, you'll be able to see a little question box below. I'm going to type in it now. So I'm just going to say, ask me questions. So if you type your questions into this box, we'll be able to answer them if we can, because obviously a lot of this is still live, it's still being written, but the best we can, we'll try and help. If not, we'll have a conversation offline. So we'll be around for a little bit longer just to answer any of your questions. We're just going to mute ourselves while we wait for that. Thank you. Hello, we're back. We've got some questions. Right, the first question I've got, I'm going to read it out for you, is I am all covered when it comes down to IT security, but how would GDPR affect me when I only send out e-flyers to clients? There are also loads of companies out there that sell you stat list. I'm going to guess you mean data list. Will that become illegal now? Right, okay. This is quite a difficult question.
Good that you covered, first of all, good that you covered technically on a technology basis. That's brilliant.
Absolutely.
News.
Right, this is a difficult question. I kind of hope that nobody would ask because I don't know myself. So basically, it depends what kind of company you are at the moment from what I can gather. So remember, I am not a legal expert here. So if you are B2C, then you absolutely need to look into how GDPR affects you in terms of your consent for your data. If you are B2B, then it's a little bit more woolly because there is something called the PECR regulation, which you can find out about on the ICO website on that link that it is there. And on that, it says for B2B marketing, it's still the same as how it's always been. And there's kind of this discrepancy of whether that's the case or whether it won't be the case, and we still don't know. So in terms of how you market to people, it's still very woolly. In terms of selling you a data list, there's been issues with that. I know that some data companies that I've spoken to have turned around and said, well, we're GDPR compliant. It all depends upon the consent of how those people have given you data. So at the moment, it's a difficult one to answer, and there is not enough information being given that is clear.
However, I think the important thing here, again, you can see specific potential issues, yes. and I guess that's how we have to answer this at the moment. So there are, again, this is where the legal advice comes in. So when you bring it to the table and something specific like that, you can now raise, right, well, I've done this and I know I've got that and I know I've got this. That still is a bit of a question that you're concerned about. So that's where that legal advice probably needs to come into play. And I know that's kind of us passing the buck, but that is, you know, we have to be very honest at this stage.
At the end of the day, our kind of specialism here is IT. It's not marketing, as much as that's part of my job. But within that, I think, you know, there are some B2C companies that we've seen. So, for example, Disney are asking you to confirm that you're still happy to receive emails and the like. So in terms of marketing, it's a bit woolly still. Hopefully we'll get some more information on that soon. We have then had another question here, which is, we've been advised to ensure against cybercrime to cover in the eventuality of a breach. Is this good practice, as well as putting in the measures you suggested? Also, we've been informed that we need to opt in our member database once again for emails post 25th of August next year. Is this correct? Obviously, I've just said about the emails. Obviously, there's a bit of woolliness in terms of B2C and B2B. You need to look into that. It's not clear at the moment, but in terms of cybercrime cover for insurance, I believe Simon is a brilliant person to speak to.
Yeah, my wife works in insurance, that's why. So unfortunately, I have these interesting conversations. The answer is certainly to speak to insurance companies, because these sort of things are very much coming out there. Both on cyber is massive in insurance at the moment. Cyber terrorism, but also GDPR is very much on their radar. So yes, definitely engage with your insurance company about that.
And then we've had another question here, which is from, I'm not going to name anyone, so let's not say their names. We use a cloud-based HR system. Who holds ultimate responsibility if there is a breach? Within that, with that, there is the issue of it's about how you process your data. So as much as, yes, you have a cloud-based HR system and they need to be compliant as well, so do you. Now, in terms of who has ultimate responsibility, I'm not really sure, if I'm honest.
Can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
It makes no difference that you're on the cloud, I think is probably the best answer
that's a good
to
point.
that. We could argue that on the cloud it might be more difficult to obtain, to hack into that environment, depends how it's hosted, etc. Ultimately, you've still got the same disciplines of, how are you going to churn out that information from there as well? Yeah.
With GDPR, from what I've gathered, is you're holding the data. It's you that's responsible. You've got to,
absolutely.
It's your responsibility. You're the ones that want to hold it. But yeah, we have another one here. Would all companies need to be Cyber Essentials accredited when dealing with B2C? From what I am aware, Cyber Essentials, we are Cyber Essentials accredited ourselves. Cyber Essentials is sort of a trust mark, and it's more for public sector in terms of, for the supply chain of public sector and other bodies that, you're seen as you are secure. But as far as I'm aware, in terms of B2C, that's not.
No, it's not critical at this stage. It's the best way of comparing it is it's a little bit like an ISO. Some people will want you to be ISO certified to work with those. At the moment, GDPR does not say you have to be Cyber Essentials certified.
It's more like a trust mark. It's a bit like your investors in people to a certain extent. I would say Cyber Essentials is. And so we're just waiting now. We haven't got any questions at the moment. So we're just going to mute ourselves for a few minutes to see if there's any more. If not, we'll come and sign off. Right, we've got another question here. How will GDPR affect IT support for providers who access other companies' IT systems? They have the keys to everything as part of what they do. Basically, it's the same. We need, if, for example, us as an IT provider, you need to process data in a particular way in accordance with GDPR. It's no different to any other company. Apple has your passwords. I have an account on House of Fraser. They have my passwords. There's not really that much difference, if we're being honest. Obviously, there is a lot more data, but everyone needs to be GDPR compliant. And I've lost my words today. Has anyone else got any questions? We'll just mute ourselves again. Right, there doesn't seem to be any further questions. We are always available. Our phone number is there. Oh, hang on, we've got one. Just one second. Thank you very much. This was very informative, and I have heard so many scary stories from other IT companies out there just to try and get more work out of them. Well, I'm glad you appreciate what we've tried to do today. So thank you for that. So we have a phone number there. If anyone has any further questions, I really recommend going through the ICO webpage. You might come out of it thinking, I still don't know what to do, but it's better to try and understand it as much as you can in the coming months so that you are preparing yourself. You need to talk to anyone about your security. We're more than happy to help. So thank you very much for your time today, and I hope to hear from you soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.